Assessment in the IB is not what you think it is. It is not about ranking students against each other. It is not just a grade that you give at the end of the year. Assessment is actually an intricate part of learning, and understanding that philosophy will really have an impact on the way you plan, the way you teach, the way you support your students, and also the way you assess them. By the end of this video, you will understand how assessment works within the IB, and also how it can become a really useful tool for your own professional development. There are two types of assessment: external assessment and internal assessment. So let's start talking about external assessment. So this refers to tasks that are set by the IB, the same questions for all students across the world, and they're also marked by the IB. This means that the students sit the exams in your school, but the exams are sent away and they are marked by trained IB examiners. You as a teacher are not involved in the process. For the diploma students, this applies to the exams they sit at the end of the two-year program. In the NYP, external assessment is optional, but for those schools that have e-assessment, external assessment also exists. What external assessment does for the IB is to ensure international standardization. So a student in Tokyo, a student in Sao Paulo, or a student in Madrid, they're all going to be assessed against exactly the same standard. In contrast, internal assessments are different. These are assessed by the classroom teacher. However, they are then reviewed and moderated by the IB. Depending on your subject area, there will be different types of tasks for internal assessment. So it could be a portfolio task, or it could be an investigation, or a practical, or an oral exam, like in the case of languages. And the IB provides the structure, the conditions for these exams, and the assessment criteria. However, it is the school, it is the teacher that conducts these assessments, and they also mark these assessments. This is where it gets interesting. You as a teacher mark the internal assessment. However, the IB is going to review your marking and is going to moderate it. So it means that the grade that you have given is not necessarily the grade your students are going to achieve at the end. This leads us to the question of moderation, which is what we are going to be talking about next. When teachers hear their grades have been adjusted by the IB, the initial reaction is to take it personally. However, this is not a reflection of your ability as a teacher. It is simply the IB's way of ensuring that every student in every country is being assessed fairly against the same standards. You should see this as an opportunity to develop professionally and to deepen your understanding of the assessment criteria. It really is a learning process, and the comments, the feedback the IB sends to the school is usually very useful. And remember, the feedback is not going to be directed at you personally as an individual. It's directed at the department. And that distinction matters because marking should never be a solo exercise. Before grades go to the IB, there should really be internal moderation processes in place. The head of department should be running a moderation exercise just to ensure that everyone has marked and graded their papers, their exams, using the criteria and the understanding of that criteria in the same way. And like this, if the IB adjusts your grades, it's a signal rather than a verdict. If your grades were to be adjusted because you've been too generous or too strict, this is a real learning opportunity. You'll have real data that you can use to look at your assumptions and readjust, and that's it. The IB will send comments if there's been readjustments, and do read them and spend time revising them because they are useful. And this brings me to the role that assessment and internal assessment plays from the very first day of your teaching. Across the IB continuum, from the PYP to the diploma program, the balance between external assessment and internal assessment is what makes IB assessment so rigorous and so well respected worldwide. As a new IB teacher, there are three main takeaways from this video. First of all, know your components. Understand exactly which parts of your subject area are going to be assessed externally and which parts are going to be assessed internally. Your subject guide is your first port of call. And then I would recommend also using marked samples to help you internalize the assessment criteria. Secondly, start preparing your students early, both for the external assessment, but in particular for the IA. Scaffold this process, support it, and build it into your long-term plan right from day one. Finally, mark with the criteria, always. This will not only help you understand the assessment criteria better, but it will also protect your students and will ensure that your marking stands up to moderation. So one thing to do this week is check the assessment criteria for your subject and see one place in your next unit where you can reference the assessment criteria naturally, not as exam preparation, but just as simply as part of the conversation around your subject. If you want to go deeper on how IB assessment works in practice, the next video is a good place to continue. See you soon.